Hello everybody, I'm here today with Kieran Lombard in order to celebrate International Mother Language Day. Hello Kieran, welcome. How are you?
Great, yeah.
So I'd like to start asking you, could you tell us a little bit about your language story? Which languages do you speak and why? What's your connection to those languages?
So my mother is German and my father is Irish. And so my mother started teaching me and my brother German. And as a family, we then moved over to France, to Paris. And during that time, my mother continued to teach me and my brother German. But then it turned out we were going to stay longer in Paris. So we stopped learning German and instead we started learning French. We moved to France when when I was 2 years old. And so I think I kept learning German for at least a year, and then it turned out we were going to stay longer in France. To answer your question, if I'd continued learning German, I would speak German today, but I don't. And so I speak English. I have a basic understanding of French these days, but that's mainly because after we came back from France, continuing to learn French and speak French was much harder, and primarily because I think the way French was taught here in schools was probably not great, and also, you know, the fact that neither of my parents speak French fluently either, probably didn't really help. But otherwise, I also do speak some Spanish, but my Spanish would, you know, because I don't practice, it's not fantastic. I have a basic understanding of Spanish, but that's largely due to my partner being Spanish and you know, having family in Spain and that kind of thing.
And what age were you when you moved back to Ireland?
I was somewhere in between 7 and 8 years old. So in total, we were in France, in Paris for 5 years.
I'm inferring that your family language is English and was English growing up. And so what was it like growing up, both when you were living in France, but you were very little, but then moving to Ireland? What was it like growing up with a mom who was German and a dad who is Irish? What was it like growing up with both cultures?
I guess in some ways, even though I have, you know, an Irish passport and that kind of thing, it took a long time for me to actually kind of feel properly Irish. But that was also because I was born in Belgium. So, you know, my background is somewhat complicated, and also my surname is Lombard, which is not Irish. My family on my father's side, we believe that originally we came from Italy as a family, but that was probably 600-700 years ago, and you know, they came from Italy to, we think, to Ireland, or somehow arrived in Ireland, and we can trace that back. So, you know, I guess I've always felt maybe, you know, Irish, but then international to a degree. And so, yeah, as a child, it felt a bit difficult because, you know, a lot of children and a lot of people in general like to put people into boxes. And, you know, if you're not, you know, you don't necessarily have an Irish surname. Certainly my accent back then wasn't very Irish, and even now it's fairly neutral, I think. You know, a lot of kids and stuff like that didn't really know, you know, how to put me. They didn't really consider me Irish, I guess, even though I felt like I was Irish. And so at times it felt a bit weird or uncomfortable, I guess, as regards to fitting in. But, and also, it's just to put it into perspective, Ireland back then, this was the 80s, you know, wasn't a very diverse place, really. So, you know, more people were really still leaving the country at that stage than actually coming back. So I think probably it was, you know, even through the 90s, it was still a bit odd to have someone like myself who was, you know, had this kind of mixed background, I guess you could say. Plus these days, it's a lot more common.
And were there any advantages of growing up with, because even though your family language was English, your mom is still German. So I wonder, was there, you know, any cultural elements that you would have had from having a mom from Germany? So can you think of things that growing up, you know, were cool or different or?
Sure, I wouldn't say necessarily cool or anything like that, but it was, yeah, just different. Just, I guess, a German sensibility of getting things done. And certainly back then, trying to get things done in Ireland was often, a time-consuming thing. And I think that's becoming less of an issue these days. But, there's always like, the whole attitude of, sure, it's grand, and it still exists to an extent. And it's also charming, actually. That's also part of what makes Ireland charming. But, whilst in Germany, and, there's this whole thing of if you say something, you mean what you say. Whilst in Ireland, there's a lot of hidden stuff behind what people say, and you have to kind of understand that. I guess if you say what what benefits or positive outcomes were there as regards to being someone with a different background or mixed background, I think it just gives you a different perspective on the world and on life, and
What's your connection with Germany? Did you travel to visit family
I have a very really small connection to Germany. Unfortunately, most of my mother's family, they all passed away or disappeared during the Second World War. So my mum was an only child. She grew up post-war Germany. My mum really wanted to get out of Germany and do her own thing, and is a very independent person even to this day. But so me and my brother never had a very strong connection to Germany. I mean, we have German family friends and stuff like that. But, because I don't speak German, I guess also that, plays a major part of not feeling so connected to the country.
Did you ever, at any stage of your life, feel like learning German as a second language?
Yeah, sure. Many years later, after coming back to Ireland, yeah, it did kind of cross my mind. Actually, early 20s, really. I kind of thought maybe it'd be a nice thing to learn. I mean, also just to say, I never learned Irish, because when we moved back, by the time we moved back, it was really my parents kind of viewed it as pointless, really, to start learning Irish. We've been learning all these other languages, and so it was just overcomplicating things. So they managed to essentially make it so that I didn't have to study Irish, because at that stage, as I said, it was a bit late. So I mean, again, I also feel that with Irish to a degree that I wish I had learned it, because just to feel, I guess, a bit more connected to Ireland, or and the same to Germany. But then also on the other hand, reality also plays a role where I don't really have the time these days to do something like that. And in the big scope of things, it's not as important for me now, I guess.
And so do you tell me your partner is Spanish, and you have a son?
We do, and he is nearly 2 years old. And the way we kind of communicate with my son is I speak to him in English, and my partner, she speaks to him in Spanish. And that can be difficult at times, obviously, because we're living in Ireland. So it can be challenging at times, because I think particularly for her, because our relationship is kind of mainly in English. So when we're communicating with each other, it's in English, and then for her to switch to Spanish to speak to Liam, our son, can be difficult at times. So at the moment, he's really kind of, I guess you could call it Spanglish. That's what he's speaking. So he speaks a mixture of some Spanish words and then some English words. I think he kind of chooses whatever's easiest to say. That's what he'll pick of that language. And, from then onwards, that thing is that, But I mean, obviously, as he gets older, I imagine we'll be able to convince him to use both languages,
And so I wanted to ask you, if you could say anything to other parents who are currently raising their children bilingually, what would you say to them? But actually it has an extra new meaning, because you're also a father raising a bilingual child. So I suppose from your own experience, what could you say to other parents raising bilingual children?
Well, if I think about my own story, I guess you could say, my own childhood, I don't really speak, apart from English, I don't really speak any other language fluently, which is a shame. Now my brother, who lives in Spain, he speaks Spanish fluently, and he would also have a kind of a working understanding of French, like I would. In that, if I go back to a French-speaking country, I can understand quite a lot, and after a few days, certain words and phrases will come back to me. But it's it's a bit of work, and certainly my French would be quite basic because, again, I learned it as a young child, so I wouldn't have very complicated French. So I guess it would be, to answer your question, maybe keep it simple and just keep at it, because I think long term it will be really beneficial to your children, you know.
And can I ask you, Kieran, if you were to go back growing up and everything, would you change anything? Would you wish anything was different languages wise now from an adult point of view?
Not really, because, you know, my parents did what they thought was right at the time. So yeah, I think it probably would have, realistically, it probably would have been a better thing for us to keep at the German, because, you know, my mum could have kept at that when we left France, and because she's obviously a native speaker, and we, you know, could have kept talking German in the house. But that's just life, and, you know, fine.
Well, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to talk to you, Kieran, and thanks for sharing your story.